Salga a la derecha. Gira a la izquierda. Comencemos. En la rotonda, coja la primera salida. Salga ahora. En la rotonda, coja la segunda salida. Salga ahora. Mantente a la izquierda. En la rotonda, coja la primera salida. Salga ahora. Continúe en la derecha y vuelva a salir a la derecha. Salga a la derecha. En la rotonda, coja la segunda salida. Salga ahora. Esté preparado para girar a la derecha. Gira a la derecha. Cuando sea posible, haga un cambio de sentido. Disfruta del viaje. Hora de conducir. Gira a la derecha. Vaya recto. Vaya recto.
Total economic collapse at the start of this decade, Lebanon is the arena for an increasingly dangerous showdown between Israel and the Iranian-backed militia Hezbollah. My guest is Lebanon's economy minister, Amin Salah.
Unless we acknowledge and say that we know what our problem is, we will never get a better Lebanon. We will never build a real country. We need to acknowledge
with the BBC News. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said he's hopeful that Hamas will accept what he described as an extraordinarily generous Gaza ceasefire offer from Israel. Willa Davis in Jerusalem says there is an increasing sense of urgency to try to reach a ceasefire.
There's an increasing sense of urgency to try to reach a ceasefire in Gaza's 7-month-long conflict. The Israeli army is believed to be finalising plans for a full-scale military operation in the southern city of Rafah, where it says remaining Hamas fighters and leaders are based. Israel is pressing ahead, even though it's been urged by international allies, including the United States, not to attack Rafah because of the humanitarian crisis in the Palestinian territory. But there's also growing pressure from within Israel for the government to prioritise reaching a deal to release the around 130 hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. And according to Antony Blinken, a ceasefire agreement is now within reach.
Officials in central Kenya say at least 45 people have been killed after a dam collapse during the night from torrential rainfall. Video footage from near the Rift Valley village of Mai Mahiu shows a vast area covered in mud and flattened houses and uprooted trees. The Red Cross says it has rescued more than 100 people. It's feared many others are buried under the debris. Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has announced he's resigning after 13 months in office. He'd been facing no confidence votes after ending a partnership with the Scottish Green Party. He will stay on as First Minister until his Scottish National Party finds a new leader. Here's Rob Watson.
This is a big moment in both Scottish and British politics. The question now is whether Humza Yousaf's resignation will stop or hasten the recent decline of the pro-independent Scottish National Party. The SNP has utterly dominated Scottish politics for nearly 20 years, but polling suggests it is in retreat in the wake of the resignation of Mr Yousaf's predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, a police investigation into party funding and closer scrutiny of its record in office.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has announced that he will stay in his job. Uncertainty over the Prime Minister's future had caused more political turmoil in Spain. Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid.
There had been intense speculation that Mr. Sanchez intended to resign, especially when it emerged that he had met with King Felipe this morning. But instead, the socialist leader said he would stay on as Prime Minister with more strength than before. Last week, a judge opened an investigation into his wife, Begoña Gómez, over allegations she had influenced the awarding of a government rescue package during the COVID pandemic. Mr. Sanchez has said the case is baseless and part of a right-wing campaign against him.
Guy Hedgecoe reporting from Madrid. World News from the BBC. African heads of state and government officials have called for rich countries to commit record contributions to help developing nations combat climate change. At a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya's president called on donors to pay at least $120 billion into the specially created low-interest World Bank facility, citing Kenya's own devastating floods as one of the reasons for action. German prosecutors have told a court in Stuttgart that 9 defendants facing terrorism and high treason charges had attempted to topple the German government. It's the first of 3 trials linked to the Reichsbürger movement, which rejects the legitimacy of the modern German state. Here's Jessica Parker.
It was back in December 2022 that there were dawn raids in several places across Germany by investigators who claimed that they had unearthed a far-right plot with links to this group known as the Reichsbürger to violently overthrow the federal government, including entering the Bundestag, the Reichstag building. And so they made numerous arrests. 27 suspects are set to go on trial for this. 9 of them today in the first of these 3 trials.
Russia says it's taken another village in the course of its offensive in eastern Ukraine. Semenivka lies north of Avdiivka, which Moscow captured in February after a prolonged bloody onslaught. Kiev awaits much-needed weapons from the huge US aid package. 6 people have been convicted in Greece for their role during wildfires, which killed more than 100 people. The Mediterranean resort of Mati was partially destroyed by the blaze in 2018. Claims later that locals weren't warned in time, that emergency services had failed, and that fleeing motorists were directed towards stricken areas, so that many burned to death inside their cars. The head of the local fire brigade was among the 6 officials found guilty of manslaughter and negligence.
Welcome to Hard Talk from the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today carries a heavy burden of responsibility in a country that has spent the last 5 years flirting with complete economic meltdown. Amin Salam is Lebanon's Minister of Economy and Trade. At the time of his appointment, Lebanon's currency had crashed, the banks refused to allow customers to withdraw dollars, and some desperate people demanded access to their cash at gunpoint. Now, there are fewer bank hold-ups, but still, rampant inflation has seen the local currency largely supplanted by the dollar. Up to 80% of the population is living in poverty. National income is down by 1/3, and vital public services are failing. Can the government rescue the situation? Well, part of the problem is political dysfunction. Lebanon hasn't had a president for more than a year. Complex power-sharing arrangements have entrenched instability and corruption. Added to Lebanon's internal woes is a nightmarish set of external factors. The country's long been an arena where regional hostilities play out. Syria wields huge influence. Iran arms and finances the powerful Lebanese Shia militia Hezbollah. That, of course, means Israel sees Lebanon as a military threat. Amid the escalating regional tensions since Hamas's assault on Israel last October, violence has intensified on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border. Is the Lebanese government powerless to prevent a slide into deeper chaos? Amin Salam joins me now on the line from Beirut. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you, Stephen. Always a pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you back on the show. If I may, I want to begin with some words that you said just 1 week after October 7th. That is, after the Hamas attack on southern Israel and the very beginning of Israel's massive military response. You said at that point, we do not want to be here in Lebanon a bargaining chip in a larger geopolitical game. Isn't that precisely what your country has become?
Stephen, you know me for always my honesty and transparency, and we reached a point in Lebanon where everything is very clear and there's nothing to hide. And saying the truth and sharing the truth, admitting what is at fault is the best strategy to follow. So yes, I was very clear in what I said at that point of time, particularly because Lebanon, as a small state in this region, has been paying a very, very high price for conflicts around Lebanon and in the region for at least the past 75 years. And we have, unfortunately, been always a country where all the struggles have been moved to be solved amongst nations. We turned into a weak card that is today being played amongst the big nations as a bargaining card. We do not wish and we do not deserve to be in this position, not as people, not as a nation, not as a sovereign. Lebanon is a country that struggled and paid a very high price. It's time for Lebanon and for the international community to consider that this state, this nation that has embraced over 18 religions and sects, has proven to be one of the best and most diverse countries in many sectors, with major successes outside Lebanon from its people. It deserves a time of peace, it deserves a time of stability, and we do not deserve to be a bargaining card, and we do not want to be a bargaining card. But until today, it seems we are a bargaining card.
Whatever you deserve, the reality that we see day by day and week by week is an intensification of the violence across that borderline between your country and Israel. The death toll amongst Lebanese civilians, leave aside Hezbollah fighters and leave aside the death toll on the Israeli side of Israeli soldiers and civilians, but the Lebanese civilian death toll is now at least 68, and around 100,000 of your civilians who live in the south of your country have been displaced, forced to move. Are you ready to acknowledge that the situation is only going to get worse as things stand today?
Well, Stephen, as a government, we have been doing our utmost on the diplomatic side with the international players to avoid escalation, to avoid getting this spillover of the war in Gaza to really turn into a major war in Lebanon. But based on what you have shared today, that is information that we know, I can tell you we are officially in a state of war. If anybody is talking about escalation, they are hallucinating, because escalation has happened. You said there's over 100,000 displaced people. We're talking, official numbers that are out are about 68. I think we are over that number with official and unofficial number of death of civilians and others and soldiers, etc. So we are officially in a state of war.
But hang on, Minister, you say we are officially in a state of war. This is not your war. This is Hezbollah's war with Israel. The Lebanese National Defense Forces are barely even a presence in the south of your country. All this shows is the absolute weakness of the Lebanese state.
Well, Stephen, let me tell you, as I started in the beginning, yes, there is major desperation, there is major weakness. Even now, when you hear about the international community behind the scenes doing discussions, there has been a lot of talk that the discussions are not directly with the Lebanese government. As a member of this government, I'm not happy to know that this is the case. I'm not happy to be part of a government that is considered not the first entity to discuss the situation with, but we know that this situation is not new to Lebanon. We know that many of the things, including the maritime border discussions, have had a similar path one way or another, and this is not really the best scenario to say that this is a government.
It's certainly not the best scenario for you, Minister, because you're Minister of Economy and Trade, and this intensification of the war is deeply damaging to the interests, the economic interests of the Lebanese state in terms of agriculture, in terms of tourism, in terms of displaced people and all of the costs that come with that. You know that much better than I do. So are you now ready, as a senior member of the Lebanese government, to say that it's time for Hezbollah to rethink, to at least withdraw their forces from that southern border area to a position north of the Litani River, or maybe even still better, to actually disarm their forces so that Israel no longer sees a military threat along its northern border.
We certainly, Stephen, from an economic perspective, as Minister of Economy and Trade, I can tell you that the country and the country's national economy, at some point in 2023, before this war started, we began witnessing some development, we began witnessing some improvement, despite the fact that we still have long ways to go for true reforms and for talking really about the recovery in the economy. But there is no doubt, as you just stated, that this war has weighed very heavily on the economy, losses in the major sectors, including agriculture, including tourism, two major sectors that were still pumping some oxygen into the economy for the past few years, now are assessed in losses in the billions of dollars. Minister of Agriculture alone announced that the losses in the agricultural sectors are between $2 to $3 billion. We did an assessment, a very, very brief assessment on the impact on the tourism sector, and we're talking as well between $3 to $5 billion expected losses and already calculated losses early in this year.
So, Minister, address my question. Is it time for people like you to say to Hezbollah, stop it? In the interests of the people of Lebanon, either disarm or at least move all of your thousands of resistance fighters and their rockets to a position north of the Litani River, that is, away from direct threat to Israel's border?
Well, Stephen, I can tell you as a government, and from a very, very diplomatic point of view, we have been asking all the, if I want to call them stakeholders in this war, to really leave Lebanon alone. Because, I mean, many different players, as you just stated in the beginning, this war is being,
yeah, but Minister, if I may, just don't use words like stakeholders, because that's kind of, it's avoiding the real issues here. I need you to address Hezbollah. I was very interested the other day that one of Hezbollah's Christian allies, that is the leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, Gibran Bassil, he actually said that Hezbollah is behaving in a delusional way right now. He said they are crossing the limits of defending Lebanon, crossing that line. They're getting involved in a conflict in which we cannot make our own decisions here in Lebanon. He was actually maybe being braver than you, and he's a former ally of Hezbollah. So why can't you say to me, Hezbollah has got to change its strategy?
No, I can tell you, Hezbollah and others, and the Israelis and the intervention of all other nations, they should all consider that we cannot carry this war. We cannot go further with the escalation. Anybody involved, Hezbollah or the Israelis or the Iranians or all the forces that are being involved, should consider that Lebanon cannot carry this heavy price.
Sure, but I mean the difference is that Israel and Iran are states, so they're states over which you have obviously no control. But Hezbollah is a militia, it's a resistance, whatever you want to call it, inside Lebanon, and you speak as a senior minister in the government of Lebanon. You have a capacity, at least in theory, to influence Hezbollah in a way that you can't possibly influence Israel and Iran.
No, absolutely. I mean, and you said it, Stephen. I was one of the first ministers early on. When I was asked, I was very clear that we should, and whoever is involved, Hezbollah and others, because we know that as well there were other militias in Lebanon that started trying to use Lebanon as a land as well to get involved in the war. So we were very clear, I was very clear from the beginning, that we cannot carry this weight, we cannot economically, politically, socially, we cannot get engaged. We cannot hold or carry that burden of this war, because Lebanon is at the edge of total collapse.
One final point on that. You say Lebanon on the edge of total collapse. We've seen intensification not just in the south of Lebanon, but we've seen an Israeli drone strike in Beirut, the heart of your capital city. In recent weeks, we've seen Israeli air raids in the Bekaa Valley, far from the south, in the east of your country. How likely do you believe it is that we're going to end up with all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah, and what would that do to Lebanon?
Well, to be quite honest, Stephen, at the first few months, we were thinking that the intervention of larger nations, including the efforts that the US and France and some European countries were putting would really put an end to this, or would at least shield Lebanon. But today I can tell you, based on the escalation that has happened so far and the politics that we keep hearing about regarding the issues that are going on in Israel, that there is an interest to keep this war going, because the Israeli Prime Minister has an interest to keep this war going because of his issues internally. That really is a big concern, because they keep pushing the card, and we've been seeing more escalation as well on Lebanon the past few weeks. So I would say that things changed from few months until today. I think we are at a serious risk of having this get out of control from all parties engaged, and all the nations that were trying to help Lebanon have taken a little bit of a back seat the past few weeks. The diplomatic movement that we have seen few months ago is not as obvious today. It's been at least a month since we left Lebanon to go to attend the World Bank meetings. Since then, we have not seen serious engagement to avoid, a more regional war, as they call it.
That is a very bleak assessment. And in the middle of all of that concern you clearly have about the direction in which the war is going, you still have to try to turn around the Lebanese economy. I just wonder, you were appointed at a time when the country was in complete economic meltdown. There was basically a de facto default in the banking sector. Today, the currency is frankly still dominated by the US dollar. Your local Lebanese pound has a black market rate, which is nothing like the official rate. You said you'd fix that, but you haven't fixed that yet. To what extent do you still feel that your country is teetering on the brink of economic meltdown?
Well, I can tell you, Stephen, based on the work that has been done, despite the fact that the challenges were beyond the control of a new government that really started its work when everything was already, all the damage was done. So on the front of the Lebanese lira, I can tell you that since we took a decision and since we worked on some economic reforms, at least from the efforts that have been done by the Ministry of Economy, and they considered that us dollarizing the economy was a bad decision. Only since that day we managed to stabilize the dollar. It's been almost over 8 months now since I took the decision to allow the dollar to be used and in the market and be used as the main currency for trade, etc., etc. The dollar rate has been around 89,000. This has been a major step, and then a report by Harvard University assured that what we did was the best thing given the situation we are in. On top of that, we tried to minimize the damage that was done with the loss of value of salaries for the public sector, but it's all I would say band-aids. Until we have all the reforms.
Well, exactly. Band-aids until you get real reform. The World Bank a year ago called for swift, decisive action, particularly on reform, as the only way to restore long-term financial stability. I notice in the budget that you managed to get through the National Assembly. You've raised some taxes, you've raised some tariffs, but analysts looking at your economy still don't believe the sums add up. I mean, how are you going to convince the Lebanese people to pay more tax and to actually get your government itself to be serious about rooting out corruption?
Well, the thing, Stephen, is that, as we mentioned earlier, the problem is that there is amongst the political parties in Lebanon a kind of a stalemate situation now. None of the political parties seem to want to get to a resolve in Lebanon. They are all waiting for the big deal to come through, which will include a 360 comprehensive political, economic, social, regional deal. Anybody you talk to now on the street or in the government, they tell you we are waiting for the big deal, the regional deal to come, to be able to first elect a president, get a new government, because everything in Lebanon now is a caretaker situation. Our government is a caretaker government. We lack the presence of a head of the constitution, which is a president. Every other director or general director in the government is just replacing another one unofficially. So we are in a state of caretaker government by all means. And the political parties, particularly the parliament, is paralyzed. All the political parties are waiting to see what is the big package that's going to come from the international community, the deal between Iran and the US, the French, the everybody involved, the Arab countries.
Well,
what is the deal that is going to bring a president, solve the 1701?
Right. Right. You said at the beginning of this, Stephen, I'm going to be straight with you. I tell it like it is. I'm an honest politician. But you've just outlined your country can't even elect a president for a year and a half. You've been